evening, everybody. Welcome to the Board of Adjustment meeting of October 28th, 2015. Could we please have the roll call, please, Madam Clerk?
Herb Elliott,
I'm here.
Chris Roboski,
Here.
Chris Alhusis,
Here.
George Burris,
Here.
Michael Eisner.
Here. Okay. Madam Attorney, if you'd like to make your announcement, please.
Yes. The matters before the City of Tarpon Springs Board of Adjustment are quasi-judicial in nature. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, the board's function is to make findings of fact based upon evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the City of Tarpon Springs Code of Ordinances. This is a legal decision regarding the application before the board. The board may only consider evidence that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues arising from the application and the applicable code sections. If the evidence demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinances, the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. If the evidence demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established by the Board of Commissioners and the Code of Ordinances, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Any and all persons providing testimony at this hearing are required to do so under oath. All persons testifying at this hearing must give their name, address, and must indicate whether or not they have been sworn for the record prior to proceeding with their testimony. All testimony and questioning at this hearing must address the matters that are relevant and material to the issues under consideration based on the criteria established in the Tarpon Springs Code of Ordinances. The following is the established procedure which will be followed at this quasi-judicial hearing. First, city staff will present its testimony and evidence. Then the applicant will be given the opportunity to present his or her testimony, witnesses, and evidence. Third, members of the public opposing the application will be given 2 minutes to present any of their testimony and evidence. Fourth, members of the public in support of the application will be given the opportunity to provide their testimony and evidence. The applicant may then present any rebuttal testimony and evidence, and then the city may present any of the city's rebuttal testimony and evidence and/or a closing statement or summary. After that, the chairperson will close the public hearing for consideration by the board. At this time, would anyone who is going to be presenting or speaking at this hearing please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth on the matters before the Tarpon Springs Board of Adjustment this evening?
Here.
Thank you. When it's your turn to speak, please state your name and indicate your name, address, and indicate that you've been sworn.
Thank you very much. The next item is going to be the approval of the minutes of our meeting of July 22nd. Any comments about the minutes? I had one correction on item number 4. It's Sunset Hills 3rd Edition ADD. And that has already been directed to the planning director, so we're all set on that. If there's no other comments, you have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve with a correction.
Michael Eisner,
Voting yes or no?
George Burris,
Yes.
Chris Alhusis,
Yes.
Chris Roboski,
Yes.
Herb Elliott.
Yes. Thank you. All right, we got some new people.
We do
Who
have-
wants to make the introduction?
That's gonna be me. We've actually finally got a full staff in the planning department, hooray. I'd like to introduce you to our new principal planner, Michelle Wharton, and our new planning and zoning coordinator, who is also gonna function as the board secretary for the board. She'll be doing your minutes and that type of thing going forward as we get her more comfortable with the process and that type of thing, and this is Kim Gilders,
Hi.
Hello. Okay.
so.
I'd like to get a little bit of your background, but I also want to introduce everybody, if you don't already know, to our new alternate, Ms. Cindy Sanner, former city commissioner, code enforcement official, certified building inspector, and very happy to. Oh, you were close, right? You did inspections, right? You know a lot about construction. And I'm very happy that Cindy is on board as our alternate. We have had problems in the past getting a quorum, let alone a full 5-member board. And I'm sure you will be a very valuable asset to this board. And if you have any comments tonight, please feel free to say your piece. Okay, let's hear a little bit of your background, if you can, in 25 words or less, where you're from and your background.
Michelle.
I've been here for almost 2 months. I was the city planner for the city of Treasure Island for over 3 years. not only planning, but I was the certified floodplain manager, still am. And before that, I was in St. Cloud for about 8 years, north or south of Orlando, and graduated from UCF, and that's about it.
Thank you. Kim?
I worked for Mid-Atlantic Finance Company down in Clearwater. I was a legal secretary, and I did a few other things. And now I'm here. I'm happy to be here.
You want me to introduce myself 5 months later?
I don't know if you've done that before. We all know who Heather is, right?
I'm the planning director for Tarpon. I've been here almost 6 months now. Essentially, I've got a master's degree from the University of Albany, or UAlbany, and I have a certified planner. I've been working in planning in Florida for about 10 years, mostly in Citrus County and Manatee County, but I've also held positions in the state of New York with 2 different jurisdictions, a municipality and a county. And then I worked outside of Boston in a town called Randolph, Massachusetts for some time too. So I've worked in 3 different states. Majority of my time has been spent here in Florida, and I'm very happy to be in Tarpon Springs.
Well, we're very happy to have you. It's quite a privilege. So let's begin with our next item, number 5, 515 Midway Lane.
This application is to authorize a variance to exceed the maximum allowed square footage for a garage in the R70A zoning district. The subject property is located at 515 Midway Lane, which is part of its block. The lot is Block 1, Lot 7, and Lot A of the Springfield Park subdivision. It's a single-family residential home on the property, and that's on Lot 7 of Block 1. And what the applicant is actually requesting is on the adjacent property, and as you can see on the site plan that's been attached, they have a wetland area that encompasses approximately about 40% of that property, and the applicant would like to put on a detached garage. Under our land development code regulations in the R78 district, they are limited to 300 square feet. The applicant wants a significantly larger structure. The structure that he's proposing is 2,160 square feet roughly. And so because of that, that's the crust of the application for the request here. Essentially, what could be developed on that property is another single-family home. The property A has the same development rights as any other lot it's a recognized lot of record. It's a legally conforming lot of record. All the setbacks can be met on that lot, including the waterfront setbacks as well as the wetland setbacks for any type of structure that would be built there. Really, the basis for this particular application is because it's an accessory building and not a primary structure. That being the case, basically there is no physical hardship on this because it could be attached to the existing structure on the adjacent property, and the basis for a variance in our particular community based on our regulations is you have to have a physical hardship. There is a means by which that it could be a minimal variance or actually make the variance completely moot, which means it would be unnecessary if that structure was attached to the existing home on Lot 7. So because of that, staff cannot support a variance for this particular application. That being the case, this is a very restrictive regulation for this particular property. We're talking over an acre worth of property between the 2 combined properties. It's outside the wetland, it's about 1.73 acres. That's probably one of the bigger lots that we have that are actually zoned R70A. So this restriction becomes very burdensome on the applicant. That still being the case, it's not a minimal variance, and the staff, in order to have a positive finding, must have a minimal variance. So staff is recommending denial of the application based on the fact that it can be minimized at this particular time, and staff can't support that based on what our regulations state at this particular time. So that's staff's recommendation, and I can answer any questions that you might have on this particular property.
I have a question.
Chris?
The property just prior to that property has an enormous structure. It's not attached to a home that I could see. How did that happen?
I went back to try to find the permitting for that structure, and I could not find the actual permitting, other than it is permitted. I could not, it's too old for us, that we don't only keep documentation for building permits back 10 years. It exceeds that 10-year threshold. So while I can prove that it was permitted, I can't prove why it was different, if this regulation was different or not at that particular time. So that structure was permitted, but
Does it belong to the house next door?
yes,
And so are those two separate lots?
yes,
So it's an identical situation?
very similar situation.
Only they got to build it?
Only they got to build it, and again, I don't know the crust of it. I'm basing my recommendation on what's in the code today after looking at that particular structure, because I had the same question. I can't answer that question for why that particular structure was allowed to be permitted, but under the regulations as they are stated in the code, it would not be allowed today.
But this analysis, number 4, granting this request would confer special privilege that others in the district would not be able to enjoy is incorrect.
Well,
Because someone already is enjoying it.
exactly, but because I don't know the basis and crust of that particular application, it's a separate type of application. I don't know if it came through just as a building permit. I could not find a previous variance that was done on that property, but again, our records are still in storage, so it is possible that there was one granted or it was lost in translation. However, so while there is somebody who exists, that any other person coming in would fall into the same situation that Mr. Young is falling into. They would not be allowed to permit that structure of that size on the property today. So that's why it's special circumstances, because another additional application.
Especially if the regulation was designed to keep structures from being an eyesore for, that one certainly is, and people can see it. The one that they're proposing, you won't see it.
That's part of my staff analysis was that, yeah, it's in the middle of their lot. What he's proposing is actually gonna be in the middle of his lot. And with the size of the lot, you're talking like 600 feet between it and the river. There's no way you're going to see that structure
Certainly not from the road.
from the road. The road ends there even before you get to that particular lot anyway. It ends at lot 7. So you are correct. And the basis for that application of having accessory buildings, again, most of the lots in R70A use a 6-unit per acre density that you can have. So per acre, you can divide out 6 lots. So it's a significantly less and smaller lots. It just happens to be that this lot is a much larger lot that hasn't been subdivided, and Mr. Young wants to make it a single home site. And because of the fact that he's choosing to do that, this accessory structure regulation is a very burdensome regulation in his particular case. You're not gonna have the same cases in a lot of other locations just because you don't have property of that size.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
Let's first, I want to see who the parties are. Mr. Young, is he here? And Commissioner Terrapini, you're his representative, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
All right,
Chairman?
questions from the board?
Yes. With me, I have the R70 district dimensional regulations. And as you indicated, the minimum lot area is 6,500 square feet. And with that, we can actually allow the house to be built, and also we can have a structure in the back as well. The scenario that we have now, which is unique, and we have 2 lots together, and the applicant, the only thing is requested is just to have one structure there on the side. We addressed that issue in the past, but we never really done any changes. I think it's time for the code to be updated. This way, the applicant doesn't have to come here for something like this.
I agree that this is a somewhat outdated regulation. We might need to look at it, and that's something that staff has indicated to the city manager that we might want to bring forward to the Planning and Zoning Board,
Right.
which we will probably do in very short order.
Yeah, because if that code was updated, the applicant should have to be here right now.
That's very true.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the board at this point?
I have a question.
Yes,
On the
sir.
survey, there's a special surveyor's note regarding any other, the lower left of page 2, I believe. Special surveyor's note, this boundary was prepared without the benefit of a letter from the title report. There could exist other easements, restrictions, encumbrances, etc. They were not presented to the surveyor, and so on and so forth. Do you have anything else on that? From the Pinellas County or anybody else?
No, I mean, this is basically a very standard surveyor note that you get when they don't do a full title search. When they just do a boundary survey, you usually have notes like this one because they're not actually searching for all of the other encumbrances. If there were easements or those type of things that have been granted, when I did a search of the records, I found no additional easements or those type of things that would impact any of what the request is. There's no easement running through the middle of the property or any of that type of thing. So I found nothing in the cursory search that I did, but usually those types of types of notes are put on when they don't do a full title search through the record.
Okay, I have a question of the planner, but I'll wait. Cross-examination, any questions of the planning department, sir?
No questions of the planning department. I'd just like to say a few words when the time comes.
Okay, now is the time. Go
All
ahead.
right. Good evening, Honorable Chairman and the Board. Townsend Tarpon, 434 Innis Drive, Tarpon Springs, Florida. Speaking on behalf of Mr. Young tonight and for myself, certainly not as a city commissioner for the record. For the most part, we concur with the staff report. We feel like staff has done the applicant a just staff report with the exception of the reason for denial. For the most part, the reason for the denial, I would say, is because the planner cannot go against the code that she has to work with. But I feel like if you read between the lines of the staff report, you'll see that obviously it's an outdated code and needs to be adjusted. I understand that part of your review criteria is in relation to the applicant having a hardship, so I'll touch briefly on that. For the most part, we believe that the hardship in this particular application is the fact that the code is restrictive and too outdated, as Mr. Alahusa said. Because the code is outdated and it's used to dealing with more of a smaller lot size in relation to like a 6,000 square foot lot versus an acre 7, we feel like it's too burdensome and restricted. So that being hardship 1. Excuse me, hardship 2 is the applicant has his current home under contract closing shortly, and at his current home, it's a couple-acre parcel with a large garage, and Mr. Young is in the construction business, so there's a need for adequate space to store his tools and necessary related building materials. So without the garage size that he's asking for, therein lies a hardship for Mr. Young and what he does for a living. I do think it's important to note for the record and moving forward that with the current zoning that's in place with the R70A, with the square footage that Mr. Young has in his lots, he could build up to about 10 units. He's certainly not asking to do that. With those 10 units that he could build, which is something that Mr. Alahusis alluded to, each one of those 10 units he would be allowed to build an accessory structure. So if you consider that, there certainly would add a lot more traffic to Midway Lane, and certainly 10 units is a lot more of a intense use than a couple thousand square foot garage. So we feel like that's important to note. He's not asking for 10 units. He's not asking to build another house. As it was indicated by staff, if the garage structure was to be attached to the home, we wouldn't even be here tonight. But he has future plans for an expansion of the existing home, and adequate square footage to have a freestanding garage. So we look for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Tirapani? Okay, I do have one question, if I could ask it, Heather, and you have the right to remain silent, but I asked you about this before, and you said, but for the wording of these criteria, you would be in favor of the variance?
That's correct. I can't support this because of the regulation. However, there are no constraints on this lot. They are meeting all the setbacks. They are far exceeding what's required in as far as screening and that type of thing for this particular project. So staff has no concerns outside of the fact that the regulation is restrictive and it's not a minimal variance, unfortunately, which I need to have a positive finding.
Okay, well, we're going to need to look at our code. I think we're going to discuss that later, I hope a little bit. What's the next step in our procedure?
The next is to open it up to
Okay,
public
public.
comments.
Any public comments on this application? Seeing and hearing none. Motion?
It can go to the applicant to either rebut anything that was brought forth or
Any further comments from the city or the applicant?
No further comments.
Close the public hearing.
All right, we'll close the public hearing and then ask for a motion. Right?
Correct.
All right, is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second?
I second.
Discussion?
So if we took this literally, shall grant no variance unless certain standards are met and proved by competent and substantial evidence, then we would not be able to.
The board is the finder of fact, and the board can make decisions based on what's presented here. So if you believe that the testimony and evidence that was presented here is supportive of the criteria that are outlined in the code, then you can find in favor. If you believe that it's not, then you don't.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? Well, I just want to echo what has been said. I think that the applicant should be granted his variance. It's unfortunate the code is worded this way, but it's our job to use sound discretion and good judgment, and I would support the motion. So if there's no further discussion from anybody, roll call, please.
Michael Eisner,
Yes.
George Burris,
Yes.
Chris Alahousas,
Yes.
Chris Rabowski,
Yes.
Herb Elliott.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, your variance has been granted. You have a year, I think, to start construction of your garage.
He's gonna start construction before then. You're all set.
He's got shovel in hand. Right? Midway Lane, by the way, is the historical historical basis of that. This town used to be famous for keeping carnival people. And so the carnival people they created a street called Midway Lane. Yeah, I don't know, you're more involved with the history than I am, since you're so much older than I am, but old Mr. Fontana lived on Midway Lane. May he rest in peace, I guess, or wherever he wants to go.
You're all set. Thank you so
All right,
much.
get out of here before we change our mind.
Oh,
Congratulations.
victim.
Next applicant is 119 and 129 Ring Avenue. And let's start with.
You got it. This is a variance request to eliminate a required 8-foot parking lot landscape buffer in the rear of the project. This is the Eco Village project, and they are getting ready to actually submit for their final site plan after a long, arduous process through the Heritage Preservation Board to get approval for demolition of 2 homes that were on the property. One home has already been relocated, and the other one is set for demolition very soon, I'm sure. And with that, this particular variance became apparent when they started looking at how they would like to subdivide the land. There is a rear access road or alleyway behind this that actually, Joe Kokolakis, his offices, their parking lot has a license to encroach that goes right through that. That's why it's actually paved, otherwise it'd be an unimpaved.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
When you say rear, could you be more specific, north, south, east, west? I couldn't understand where exactly it was. I think it's important. Where is it? Is it Jesse Burke Alley behind
If you open your site plans to the second page, the buffer that is actually required, or being required, is actually shown, that 8-foot landscape buffer is shown there.
So for the record, could you please describe where that is? It's
It's to the west.
east of Center?
It's actually south of Center. It's east of the property.
It's at the top of the
It's
page.
the top of the page.
Okay,
Oops,
all right.
somebody spilled their water.
All right. So it's
It's west.
the west boundary of the
That's
property.
correct, west boundary of the
I'm
property.
sorry to interrupt, but thank you.
That's okay. So where that landscape buffer is actually shown, just on the other side of that, where it shows the existing asphalt, that's actually a right-of-way, a public right-of-way. And the applicant for this project And the adjacent project, which is Joe Kokolakis' office building, is actually going to vacate that alleyway. When that alleyway is vacated, he already has a license to encroach, that's why it's paved to begin with, otherwise it'd be an unimproved right-of-way. He already has that license to encroach, he's asked for the vacate, more than likely the board will approve the vacate because they've already approved the license to encroach, and being that he's had the license to encroach for some time, at this point, it just makes sense for us to go ahead and vacate that right-of-way now that this development's coming forward, for the Eco Village. Eco Village's access point will actually not be on that alleyway, it'll actually be internal to their project, okay? So what would be required, once that alleyway is vacated, would be that they would have to put in this 8-foot buffer between commercial and residential. So what they're asking for is to eliminate that 8-foot buffer there, because it's between pavement. It's gonna be between pavement on one side and pavement on the other side, you're gonna have 8 foot of landscaping. They're asking to eliminate that and to put in a wall instead, replace it with a wall. This is actually in the special area plan. It's one of the first real variances of a larger, more mixed-use project that you're going to see in the future. You're going to see a lot more of these in the future. And it makes sense in this particular case. It provides more privacy to have a wall there. The landscaping's not going to survive when you have that much, even with irrigation, when you have that much heat island effect between those two properties. Plus, people are going to drive over that when they could drive down their right-of-way, go into the houses. You're going to have trucks that are going to run into that. Just by virtue of it being there, people will think, if you have a wall there, it's a little bit more of a safer situation. People really know where that boundary, where that outside boundary line is. So that's really the crust of this particular application. Staff has really no concerns here. The special area plan allows for flexibility of this type, but it does require, it's not something that can be approved during site plan approval. There are warrants, which are a little different than a variance. This is not a particular subject that can go by warrant. So because of that, we brought it before the Board of Adjustment to have you guys look at it, make sure that you are not concerned that staff is recommending approval on this particular application. It just makes sense in this particular case.
Use the word warrants for the public, it's
Correct.
traffic studies.
No, warrants in the special area plan are actually deviations from the code that are actually allowed during the site planning approval process. This is not a particular part of that can be approved by warrant. It must go through a separate variance. They've decided to bring the variance forward at staff's recommendation before they go forward for their site plan, so that they know they can actually do this. Because if they start working on the site plan, then discover they have this, then they gotta derail that whole process. We're trying to really get them ready, so when they go for site plan approval, they're done and they're ready to go and actually start constructing.
Mr. Chairman?
Questions? I'll start, Chris.
You mentioned that the 8-foot buffer will be eliminated and be replaced by a wall.
A wall, yes.
Can you describe the wall?
The wall is gonna be a 6-foot-high wall.
Concrete?
And it will be completely a solid wall. You won't be able to see through it. So it will provide some kind of sound deafening between the parking lot and the rear, and again, the rear loading for the buildings. These buildings are all rear loaded on that back right-of-way to preserve the view on Ring Street, really. They front up on Ring Street, or Ring Ave, and that's the intention of the special area plan. So they're rear loaded. So you're gonna have parking on one side of that wall and parking on the other side of that wall. That wall is gonna allow for a lot more sound deafening than trees would. So it's gonna be a 6-foot wall that'll be the whole length of that right-of-way there, to buffer those two properties from each other.
So you believe the wall will give more privacy to the people than a landscaping would?
Absolutely,
So it is an improvement then?
absolutely.
When that happens, is the garage going to be shifted in any way?
Yes, what's happened is they've been able to actually pick up additional open space actually up on the project, and they've been allowed to shift the garages and the design for what's between the actual attached homes and that right-of-way, because of the fact that they're not bound by that buffer. Because they can now push the right-of-way over, they now have a little bit more space to play with, which is gonna allow for a lot more infiltration of water actually up on their site. It's gonna actually improve their stormwater infiltration. Not a whole lot, but enough that it's gonna matter.
So
because
more
it's not a
trees
big
will be
project.
planted too, right? More trees will be able to plant too?
Sure, they will have more open space to be able to plant additional additional trees up on the project.
The steps that you have between the townhome and the garage, that will be eliminated as well?
It appears that those will be eliminated. They've also asked for an administrative waiver from the 18 inches above the crown of the road is the requirement for them to be elevated. They've asked for that regulation to be administratively waived, which our building division director said that he will have no problem waiving once he's seen the whole stormwater plan for this, that they're managing the stormwater on site. And so because of that, these homes are gonna be more accessible to a larger variety of people because they're gonna be a flat entry. It's not gonna have those steps up. Again, it wasn't a lot of steps, but it's still somebody who is an elderly person or somebody who's got a disability, any type of step up makes things
Sure.
difficult for them. So this is going to improve it and open the project to a wider audience, definitely.
So it will be more useful and accessible to wheelchairs as well, then?
Exactly, and the great thing about this particular project, it being central to downtown, having housing that is that accessible to a wider variety, a wider audience essentially of folks who could occupy these units, is it's gonna provide for a more economically viable project with all the new businesses that we haven't opened. This is just a great showpiece to have as part of that downtown piece. It's really gonna be like the crown jewel for this, and Santos Isles is kind of on the other side of town, is really providing that living and working downtown type sense for folks that we haven't really had for a long time here in Tarpon. So it's a real exciting project to have something like this come in. And the applicant has been excellent to work with. They've been very patient with all the staff turnovers that have happened, with all of the board reviews that they have gone through. We've had a lot of meetings. They've been very willing to work with us to move things. They actually provided a lot of additional porches and things on the front portion of the property to make a really attractive fronting on Ring Street as part of their approval through HPB. So it's gonna be a really great project once we get to all the pieces together. At this point, this is the next step.
I'm sure you know that we'll be trying to redevelop the area for a long time. And I want to thank Mr. Kokolakis for having the vision and take the initiative to do that. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
I have a question on page 2, on the bottom of the page, under analysis, the second sentence.
Okay, hold on.
Reducing the buffer allows for more green space on the Eco Village project. Where will that, how will
It's-
that,
It's basically up if you flip to the third page, you can see that they've actually they've pushed the garages to allow for additional space. There's actually additional green space on each one of the lots that are shown here that it's really hard to tell here because you're talking a difference of 8 feet, so it's not a huge change. But it's enough of a change that's gonna allow an additional infiltration of water, and it's in that area between the garage and the actual buildings. That's where they've been able to adjust, the design to allow for additional open space and actually reduce some of their impervious area as well, because now they don't have stairs. So, yes, sir.
So is the finished 20 feet, that there'll be that one-way?
Yes, this is gonna be a one-way, this will be a one-way drive, and it's a 20-foot drive. It'll basically come off of Orange and end on Center, where people can either go north or south on Center.
When the 6-foot ends at center, does it teeter down to be so that somebody else going the opposite way would be able to see somebody coming out of the?
Well, they'll be required to have, it's not all shown here, because really this is not a full set of site plans. This is really a site plan for the variance process, but they'll be required to, there'll be sighting distance triangles that they have to meet, so there has to be sighting. So the wall will not be able to go straight to the thing. They'll actually have a space between, and there'll be driveways on either side of that wall, because the existing office building has a driveway, then there'll be a driveway, then the wall actually stops short of that property line, and then there's the flare for the actual driveway when you pull out onto the right-of-way. So there will be enough sighting distance there. They've looked at that to meet that criteria, where you won't be basically wall and you can't see what's coming at you.
Okay.
George?
one more question. On the 20-foot drive in the back, as a car backs out of the driveway, will you have any posts so they won't be hitting the wall? Is there any safety to that effect?
The applicant can speak if they're gonna put in bollards. I don't know if that was their plan. They're not shown on the plan
Yeah, I
here,
don't
and
see
that
it
would
here.
really be up to them on the design. We can certainly recommend that they add bollards there so that people have that queuing to stop. but the applicant can really speak to what he was looking to do for that. And with that, unless you have any other questions.
Christian? All right, will the applicant care to make a presentation?
Yes, I'm Joe Kokolakis, 134 Buena Vista Drive in Dunedin, Florida. I'm president of Kokolakis Contracting, and as Heather said, our office has been here in Tarpon Springs for the past 25 years, located at 201 and 202 East Center Street. And I'm also the owner of Ring Avenue LLC, which over the past 6 or 7 years has acquired the lots and the homes that have been left in disrepair with the purpose of redeveloping them. The vision that we have for Tarpon, we live in Dunedin, and the vision that we have for Tarpon is to create that live, work, play atmosphere. And I think with the special area plan, with current staff, with the streetscaping, with Karen Lemons, I think we've done a tremendous job changing the face of this community. And this project itself, you know, aside from the fact that it's mine, I think is tremendously exciting, because I've been looking at Ring Avenue for so long, and I'm so excited that finally we're at the point where it'll be something beautiful to look at as you come down the street. As far as the variance as far as vacating the alley, that alley has been, you know, since we've been here, we've been utilizing it. We have the right, that's why we paved it. And in some ways, the guys have felt that it's been theirs forever. I think we also own the 201 East Center Street, and there was years ago an alley to the north directly, and that alley was vacated to the benefit of the previous owner. So there's no real way for that alley to continue farther north. So it makes logical sense. It actually puts that property back on the tax rolls and generates whatever little bit of revenue that it'll throw off as far as the land. The 8-foot green space that we're asking for the variance on, frankly, didn't make much sense, because while my office is on 202 East Center Street, and these homes are contiguous to it, to have them separated only with 8 feet of grass didn't make much sense and wouldn't really provide the community that we're trying to establish in Eco Village. What we envision is a wall, is essentially an alley of their own that's 20 foot wide. So in some ways, it's wide. It's a very wide one-way road. And then if you look at where the drives are to get into the garage, you have a whole car length there too. So it won't look like a tight alley or drive. But it gives the homeowners the privacy to pull into their particular garages. They're detached garages. They'll walk. They have a nice yard between the garages and the back door of their residences. Staff has worked with us tremendously. The fact that we can eliminate, I think we'll have maybe one step if we can figure it out, which is just great, because when you had some of the elevations, some of the looks had 4 steps there, and frankly, it just wouldn't work. You'd limit your entire market. So I think both options will add to the community, will add to the success of the project, and I'm grateful again for staff working with us. Open any questions.
Have any comments from the public at all?
We've actually have absolutely no comments from the public. I had one person stop by who just wanted to understand what this was in relation to what's gonna be there. So she's actually gonna probably participate when we go to the site planning process, because she's got some interest in some of the wonderful trees apparently that you have on your property, so we'll be discussing that. But the other thing is that will probably happen is staff will probably restrict parking on the street, so that 20-foot will actually be available, that full 20-foot for people to use on a one-way basis. That's larger than most of the alleys that we have here in town already. So we'll probably put a restriction on the site plan that there'll be no on-street parking there, just because of that. You need to be able to get the trash truck down there, you need to be able to get the fire truck down there, that type of thing.
I have a question. The alleyway is 20 feet, and the landscape buffer is 8 feet. Considering whatever the width is of the fence, what happens to the rest of it, the 7.5 feet? Are you moving the whole project back?
Yes.
Or are you widening the alleyway?
If I remember, it's a little bit of both. Actually, we actually are shifting the alley to the west. which is what Heather was saying, which is going to create some more green space for the residents.
In the front.
Yes. No, not in the front, not on the street side.
It's not in
Not
the
on Ring,
front,
in
on
between.
Ring, it's actually between where the buildings are and where the driveway that'll go through, or their alleyway is going to be.
But
That distance there has increased by roughly 8 feet. It's not
Yeah.
quite 8 feet, because they added a little bit to the alleyway to make it a little bit larger than what was there, but that's where you're getting it. You're getting it in that area from where their driveway starts to the edge of their building. Not the garage, but the edge of the building itself. That's where the distance is getting, and the great thing about that is that's where your infiltration, you can have all your downspouts run right in the middle there without having that stuff unsightly stuff in the front. It can all be in the rear and the back. It's gonna be a much better, setup for infiltration, because they can run everything in a way that it's not gonna be visible to the general public.
I'm gonna ask a question, nothing to do with the variance. The term eco-village, I'm just curious, what's the eco gonna be?
The homes, this company is currently working in Dunedin on Eco Village project. They finished a project in Madeira Beach, and are going as far as Port St. Lucie on the East Coast. And the homes are designed to be 100% net zero. The garages will have solar panels, and in theory, will generate enough electricity during the day to power the home and actually put power back onto the grid. The homes will be wired to the grid in the event that the solar panels aren't working or anything like that. But it's a pretty interesting concept. The walls, whether it's the insulation in the walls, the glass, the low-flow toilets and efficient fixtures, he's created and marketed a concept that the homes themselves will have no electric bills and are eco-friendly. The materials, the sourcing of materials, the recycled materials, it's pretty interesting, and it's proven successful for them.
Solar heated water heaters, I imagine?
Everything's solar. I mean, every electric fixture in the home will be powered by the solar panels that are on the detached garages.
And the visual appearance of the solar panels, what's that gonna look like?
That's why it's pretty cool, because they're on the roof of the garage, and their garages are pitched in one direction, actually facing my office, but yeah, facing west. So at this point, they haven't been an eyesore, and if you kind of see, right now, PV photovoltaic panels are not like the big, heavy, thick ones like they used to be. They're much thinner now, and they're actually, the panels are going to be a standing seam on the garages, and they'll be sitting in between the ridges. So it's actually almost like a film now than it is a big panel.
And the vegetation, is that gonna be eco-friendly as well? Is that part of your plan?
I don't buy all of that where it's all eco, because we talked about having an irrigation system. And we discussed, and I think we do need to have an irrigation system. There will be a fair amount of grass in between the home and the garage. Yes, it will be eco-friendly, but from our perspective, it won't be to the point where it's just pebbles and seagrass, things like that, yeah.
I'm sorry, Chris, I think you want? Any further questions? Any further comments from the public? So the next step is to close the public hearing and call for this question. All right, is there anybody ready for a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Alahouzes, second by Mr. Grabowski. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion? Seeing none, let's call a vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Michael Eisner,
Yes.
George Burris,
Yes.
Chris Alahouzes,
Yes.
Chris Grabowski,
Yes.
Herb Elliott.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank
Looking forward to
you.
see a nice project.
Thank you, very nice.
Chris, we're gonna get her trained up, nobody business. You're okay, you're doing good,
I'm actually a lot nervous.
You're doing awesome, so we're very proud.
Okay. Next on the agenda, staff comment.
All that I actually have for staff comments is your schedule. I passed out your schedule for next year. I'd like everybody to look at it and just let me know if you have any concerns. I've kind of moved some of your meetings around as a result of just holidays, trying to accommodate them. So if you see any concerns that you might have, or if this is the time to change the schedule, if you have like a conflict, you know. Not that most people know a year ahead of time, but I wanted to get that out to you so that when we are gonna have to have a November meeting, or a combined November-December meeting, well, we can discuss that if you want. But we are gonna have to have another meeting before the end of the year. So at that other meeting, we can discuss any other changes. You can let me know if you have conflicts, that we need to discuss, and we can put that together, and then we can formally adopt it, or we can just have this as your meeting schedule. It's up to you. You don't really have to formally adopt your meeting schedule if you don't choose to. I mean, these are just set up for us.
Let's
you to
look at
know.
that next time maybe, but I do want to discuss November and December
Of this year, yeah. So,
Which one are you gonna do?
so right now I have 2 applications for November. And technically, the deadline isn't till, the deadline to cut for the meetings isn't till, Friday of this week. So like, people can still drop off another application if they want, but I have 2 applications at this particular point. I can't move it a week ahead because I can't meet the advertising deadline. But we could move it to you could move it to the first week in December if you want. I just gotta verify that the meeting room is open and available for you guys to do that if you wanna do that. And then you could cancel your December meeting. If you decide to do that now, we wouldn't schedule anything, obviously. So the deadline would be, anything that would come in between this week's deadline and the December meeting would then get pushed to January. So,
You're saying Wednesday the 2nd?
yeah, we can look to see if Wednesday the 2nd, if that's what you want to try to have your meeting on. I don't think there's a conflict with that meeting time. I think this board's the only board that actually meets on Wednesdays in here in the evening, so I can verify with the clerk that that will work,
I'm
but.
okay with that, gentlemen? December 2nd will be our
No problem, I have no problem.
November meeting.
Is everyone all right with that? So you want to have your meeting on December 2nd? Okay.
And then as far as the December schedule, December 23rd meeting, right, the 4th?
Yes, it's December. Right now, it's scheduled on the 23rd. You could move it, or you could lose it.
I mean, I'll be in town, I would like to.
But we would be combining the 2, right?
You could combine the 2, since you're having a meeting in December, you could just combine the 2. You just would have, you're gonna have a bigger agenda in January if that's the case. But, I mean, it's up to this board. If
What
I'm
do
not gonna have a quorum, then it really doesn't do us any good to have a meeting.
That's what I'm saying. Let's combine them December 2nd, whatever applications come in between now and then.
Otherwise, it moves forward.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that, having our November meeting for December the 2nd?
No problem.
I'm
Okay.
good with that as well.
We need a motion for that, you think?
I think we should have a motion for the record that you are canceling your December meeting and that you're going to have your November meeting in December 2nd,
I
if
would
that's your
like-
choice.
Well, let's wait to see on December the 2nd if we have a reason to have a meeting.
Well, the only problem that I have with that is I have an advertising drama. If you wait till the 2nd, I won't have enough time to advertise for applications for the following meeting. So that's the conundrum with that.
We possibly defer the December 24th meeting to January of 2016.
You could just cancel it.
Yeah, we just can't.
You just
Well, if there's
cancel it.
If we have an urgent, sometimes there's an urgent need for a variance. I don't know if there will be one, but I don't like to see people waiting 2
In the
months.
middle
It's
of
bad enough
holidays?
a year ago, they had to wait 6 months.
Right, but if we meet on the 2nd, we'll hear all the applications that came.
Unless somebody, okay, all right, I'm cool with that.
I mean, I don't think there's gonna be.
I honestly don't think you're going to have an need for emergency application
holidays.
in December for 3 weeks. You're asking somebody to wait 3 extra weeks, essentially.
Exactly.
All right, so is there a motion to have our
Yes.
meeting December 2nd?
Motion. Do we have the meeting December 2nd?
I second it.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
That's the deal. Okay.
That's good. They got everybody. Now, we're gonna cancel, we have one more motion to cancel the December meeting,
Motion to cancel,
Motion to cancel the.
Mr. Hrabowski.
December 23rd.
Second.
Make it so.
Second for somebody?
I second.
Mr. Burris, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, so we have a little respite. Next is board comments. I have some, it's gonna take a while. I've even prepared something, I broke down and did some work.
I know he wrote, because he came and saw me, he did work hard.
But if you don't want to do it, that's fine with me.
Of course we want to do that.
You want to hear something? Well, all right,
This is in regards to procedures.
yeah,
A little bit
I
of
mentioned it, I alluded to it a couple of months ago.
Right.
About the code problems in our procedures. So I wrote down, and if you could, you can use my own paper. We're coming up on the 100th anniversary of zoning next year. So 1995. So.
May I have a copy, please,
Yeah,
for the
it's
record?
coming to you.
Thank you.
You can have the James copy.
Uh,
She didn't need that.
I'm not expecting you to vote on this tonight, I just want to make some discussion started. It's just food for thought, although food might be a little bit of an exaggeration, it may not be much food. And again, I'm just in my private capacity, I'm not here saying this as a board member. The current land development code has a lot of restrictions on the board's jurisdiction, this board. Number one in my memo is lot width variances. We're not allowed to give lot width variances. For example, this happened 40 years ago in Trentwood Manor. There were 2 vacant lots, and they got lot width variances, and everybody was fine. Trentwood Manor was developed initially on the east end. It was 52-foot lots, I believe, and then the rest of them were 60-foot lots. And the city, before I got to be city attorney, didn't like these narrow lots, so they made it R70, I believe, which made the whole subdivision non-conforming,
Awesome.
which made very little sense apparently, because somebody wants to, if they got 2 lots together, they got to tear them down and build 1 house on 2 lots. And the rest of the subdivisions got 1 house on 1 lot. In any event, there were 2 vacant lots at the west end, and a guy got a variance, and they built 2 houses to match the rest of the subdivision. The point is now that cannot be done, I believe. And again, I'm not,
I actually kind of agree with you, the way that it's written, it does not appear that you can make any kind of, variance to the standards of the lot, the standard standards of lot width, lot length at all.
that really makes no sense to me. That's one thing. Next up, I want to try and summarize, just to get some ideas. Mr. Hrabowski asked me to look at a sidewalk waiver a few months ago.
Yeah.
And I did, and an issue in that case, what the ordinance said then, I think still does, if the board finds a sidewalk is unreasonable or unwarranted, and you can't prove a hardship to build a sidewalk, it's always possible, usually possible to build a sidewalk, but if it's unnecessary, unwarranted, then the board may grant a waiver. And the city attorney at that hearing said that he construed the word may to mean shall.
Right.
And I'm not really on one side or the other, it just needs to be fixed. So that's, if that ordinance is still worded the way it was then, and I believe it still is.
Yeah, I don't think it's changed.
So we need to fix that, the Board of Commissioners need to fix that. We would like to make a recommendation to the city commissioners at some point to address that issue. And I don't know if you want to discuss it now, probably not a good idea, but also in the sidewalk waiver provision of the code, it says we're not allowed to consider the absence of sidewalks as whether to grant a waiver or not. And that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense either. You know, if you got, let's say, this is what happened on Riverside Drive in Sunset
Yeah.
30 years ago. There was 1 vacant lot on the corner. George, that's
I live
your
just
husband.
down the road from there, yeah.
There's what, 15 houses with no sidewalks, and somebody on the corner wanted to build a house, and the staff recommended a waiver, and the Board of Commissioners said no. So now on the corner, there's a sidewalk that goes nowhere.
Both ends.
Both ends, both on Sunset and on Riverside. So, the point is, I think the board should consider whether there's an absence of sidewalks, if it's not necessary. And I've been in favor of sidewalks for generations, but I think if there's a lack of sidewalks on a street, that should be a factor, because it's a public benefit. You know, you have a sidewalk, people can walk a distance, not just on your lot. driveway variances. Did you look into that at all? Did you
I didn't get a chance to look into it, into this, whether or not you are prohibited, but I don't think driveways are something that, right now, the way the code's written, that you could look at. It's really dimensional criteria.
Okay. Well, that happened maybe 5 years ago. I guess I can mention his name, Attorney John Thompson and his wife Mary Ann at the Thompson property on Circle Drive. We tried, it was the surveyor screwed up and built the house too close, the builder built the house too close to Circle Drive. The simple solution would have been a driveway variance, but it was not allowed. Cindy, were you on the board at that time? Maybe
No, I was.
you were. And so as a result, they had to reconstruct the entire Circle Drive at an enormous expense, but it could have been solved with a simple variance that the neighborhood was in favor of, talking to the neighbors anyway. So I want to see the board wants to address that issue. I believe the code, this next item is modification of non-conforming uses. We all know what that is. And it says that there's a total prohibition on modification of all non-conforming uses. And I would think in an appropriate case, it may be appropriate to allow for a modification. Just to put that out for further discussion.
Do you want to do that modification via variance? Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know what I want. I just want,
Okay.
I want just the board to be
Okay.
aware of the fact that
Okay.
we have certain restrictions on our jurisdiction when it comes to non-conforming uses. And I'd like to see flexibility with a board that has good members on it. We have a very good board right now. I'm really happy to see all these knowledgeable people, and Cindy coming, and Robin Hancock, a very fine builder, and, you know, sharp people. If you have good judges, I think that's the solution. As long as we keep on doing that, then we can have a broader jurisdiction. We talked about the requirement for alternates, and the charter requires 2 alternates, and we have 1, and hopefully we'll get another one soon. The charter also provides that the board shall have the jurisdiction to grant special exceptions, which is a use variance, I believe, right? So let's say if somebody wants to build a house on US 19, it's not allowed, it's a prohibited use. Some horrible offensive use is to build a house on highway business. It's not a permitted use, it's not a conditional use. I believe it's the same thing for an RV park. You can't build a house in an RV park. It's some sort of noxious use that you're not allowed to have. And it might be appropriate in some considerations to allow for that kind of Board of Adjustments jurisdiction, perhaps.
It's a conditional use?
Well, no, you can go, it's not a conditional use either. You can't build a house on US 19. Right?
Are you suggesting to have as a conditional use?
No, I'm not saying just anything other than the fact that maybe it should be considered what to do.
By what mechanism are you suggesting that we make any of these changes?
Well, it would
Without the
be-
Board of,
No, this is all going to the Board of Commissioners.
Yeah.
This is all gonna go to the Board of
Okay.
Commissioners. It's an ordinance change.
gotcha.
But I think what I'd like to see done is at some point, several months from now, we would write a letter stating to the Board of Commissioners what our recommendations
Gotcha.
are as
Okay.
far, I'm sure I should have made that clear.
Okay.
We will go to the commissioners with a proposal for changes to the Board of Adjustments jurisdiction. Another item is financial consideration. The ordinance says that we cannot consider financial issues as a factor whether to grant a variance. That sounds great in theory, but in reality, it's totally the opposite, like tonight. We just granted a variance for the guy with the garage, you know? It's gonna, he could, if he wants to remodel his house, he could tear the garage down and put it where he wants to put it. You follow what I'm saying? Other times we've granted variances, it could have been solved with money. My point is that if it saves somebody some money and the neighbors don't object, and we think it's valid, then we should consider it. Heather and I have talked about that. I was afraid she was gonna object to a lot of this stuff, and that's why I was so prepared to have my pills this morning, but she's, I think, on board with a lot of this.
In some cases, yes. It just depends on how we word and structure ordinances in some of these cases on whether or not it can work or not.
Well, with the housing authority issue, if we hadn't have granted them the variance, then they would have lost the grant money.
A huge grant.
Right, and so to not, I mean, to not
That's
be
a
able.
financial.
Yeah,
That's what
exactly,
yeah.
so to not be able to consider that, it seemed kind of ludicrous. Because even if you disagreed with one, then you would be shutting down the grant for all the other projects.
Exactly, and that's why we provided you that information and that staff report on the backup section, that's what this was, that's what the basis for that was. It was a lender requirement that
Right.
they had to come see
But
you.
we weren't allowed to consider that.
But I think, appropriate, it's a factor, and it should be a factor. It's always been a factor. It's just theoretically, well, you shouldn't consider money as a factor, whether I think it's reasonable. Getting back to definitions, I just came across this definition of animals in our city code. And I just thought I'd pass this on to the board for whatever value you might think about it. We're talking about, sometimes definitions don't make a whole lot of sense. Animal is defined as any living dumb creature of the subphylum Vertebrata, excepting therefrom Homo sapiens. So, I know a lot of dogs that are a lot smarter than many of my clients. They're not dumb, they're smart. Does that mean they're not animals?
Apparently not.
Or it could mean that this person didn't watch the Jerry Springer show when he says that Homo sapiens should be excluded from dumb creatures. Or, I don't know, but anyway, the point is that definitions could be modified, and it's easy to do it by this board rather than going through the months review process with the city commission on a case-by-case basis. And also, since I was making this one page about the definition of animal, I threw in here this book, The Death of Common Sense, which I brought with me, and I urge the board, this is it, it's a short book, but it discusses a lot of the problems that this board can solve. And that's, what this talks about is the need for flexibility in our legal system and sound discretion and sound judgment. And I'd like to see this board's jurisdiction increased to provide for some of these issues that I just mentioned. So, that's all I have at this time. Oh, no, one more thing. Rule procedure. Currently, it says that an amendment can be made at a hearing if it's less than the variance requested in the application. And we had one a couple of months ago where it was a 1-foot increase from the variance. We realized once we got there that it was going to be 12 feet, not 11 feet or something like that. And everybody was fine with it, and there was no objection. And I would like to see the rules changed to allow us to grant immaterial applications, amendments to that variance application. And then we talked about the meeting dates. The code, the rules are proceed to the 4th week. Heather wants the 4th week, and that's the way it's going to be, I guess. Right? Because you can't have two.
Honestly, I think that's open to interpretation. You can decide what week you want to meet
No, we
on,
wanna-
what time you guys want to meet, and all that type of thing. Like,
You
this
got
is
too
one
much
of,
work. No, it's too much in 1 week.
but
I can
we're
understand.
going to shift your meetings based on the staff level of what we have here. I mean, even having only have 2 planners here, trying to have 2 agendas prepared in the same week is a near impossible task. And you do have a lot of meetings that overlap with planning board, because planning board gets shifted, because the holidays, they're on a Monday meeting. So they get shifted a lot because of the holidays that fall on Monday.
There was some discussion, do we meet on the 3rd Wednesday or the 4th? And it'd be easier on the staff to make it the 4th, and I think,
With some adjustments, because you're gonna have to, the holidays that fall
Well,
on
you've gotta-
Wednesdays, you guys,
You've got the calendar for the whole next year in your
yeah.
hands, so I think we're good with that.
I'm sorry for going through this so quickly, I just didn't want to bore you. I do think that we should discuss this at some point, and not next month, but over the next several months. Just want to give you some food for thought. Any further comments?
Just to make the board aware, the Code of Ordinances does provide that the board shall make a written report to the Board of Commissioners not less often than once a year, which means you can do it more than once a year. But there is supposed to be one that is submitted no later than March 31st of each year that details the accomplishments of the board and of the preceding year and the current
So honestly, Herb, if this is something that you really want to pursue, that report is a good mechanism to say these are the changes that we recommend.
However, that would have to be voted on by
Sure.
the board to be the approved board report.
I don't know that we can do it in 3 or 4 months to go through all this stuff.
It's up to you.
And what if the rules of procedure, are we gonna wait until we get a hold of the previous rules? Or do you wanna-
No, you want to discuss it? What do you want to do? What's the board's pleasure? We have these rules of procedure, and apparently they've been adopted by the prior board, but,
There were rules of procedure that were adopted by the prior board, but if you recall, the Board of Commissioners was in the process of revising the procedures for all the boards, and I believe that they were going to adopt uniform procedures for all the boards within the city to follow, in order to provide for consistency, with the actions of the board.
so we're going to wait to hear from the city commission?
Yes.
That's a good point. One thing we didn't discuss tonight was ex parte communications, and I'd like to make that a part of all of our meetings. We should disclose if there's been any ex parte communication between board members and the staff, or board members and the public, just so everybody knows what's being discussed outside of the room.
I would definitely welcome that, but I would tell the board that that is an ongoing obligation, whether or not it's made an affirmative part of the agenda or not.
We need to disclose. Ex parte means comments made to applicants or even the staff or public citizens, theoretically, outside the presence of the other parties.
I didn't think staff was included into that.
Staff is not included
think
in
it was
that. It
included.
is, really for the parties or any evidence.
Right.
So essentially, staff is available for questions, regarding particular regulations and aspects like that. But in order to rely on that as part of the hearing, it has to be reiterated during the hearing if you're going to use that as part of your decision-making factor. I would say that if you do have those types of discussions with staff, for quasi-judicial hearings, that it should be, made a part of the record so that it's clear to the public under sunshine law exactly what you as a member of this board is basing your decision on.
The reason I say staff, because when the Snyder and Jennings cases came out 25 years or so, and then before that, there was a same thing that applied to the Board of Adjustments. The Supreme Court ruled that these communications are frowned upon, not quite illegal, but in those seminars we talked about, the staff was included. I don't know if the courts have ruled differently since then on whether the comments with the staff are ex parte or not, but I defer to the attorney's office.
What staff does not, what conversations with staff do not count for are sunshine law violations. Discussions between board members come under the sunshine
Sure.
law, but discussions with staff do not. But in terms of considering it evidence for the purposes of quasi-judicial procedures, I would err on the side of caution, like Mr. Elliott said, and definitely, it's not a black letter law issue, that it absolutely is ex parte. But again, erring on the side of caution, I would encourage disclosure of those types of communications.
Mrs. Sander, any thoughts, comments?
I'm looking forward to meeting the three of you, with my knowledge of the city code and properties in Tarpon. It can be a wealth of information to me, so.
She is. A wealth of information. Okay, no further comments. We are adjourned. It's 8:10.